I opened my eyes to the hum of the atmospheric recycler and the scent of recycled oxygen tinged with something floral and nauseating. The year was 2417, and I was back in the induction hall of the Astraeus Colonial Academy Selection Program, the most brutal and competitive screening process in the settled systems. In front of me stood unit instructor Maven, her silver hair teased into two childish pigtails, a holographic baby rattle spinning above her left shoulder. She was holding up a stack of holographic admission chits, shimmering and pulsating neon pink. "My precious cadets," she chirped, her voice digitally sweetened by a vocal modulator. "I made your testing passes in my special color scheme. Isn't it adorable?" I recognized this moment. In my previous life, I had immediately alerted the Proctor General to stop her. He had stormed in, replaced the chits with standard data wafers, and gotten our unit into the simulation halls in time. We passed the physical and tactical exams. Wesley, my childhood bondmate, and I even secured placements in the prestigious Orion War College. But the day the acceptance manifests were posted, Instructor Maven clung to the observation deck of the central spire, sobbing for the station's news drones. "I only wanted my cadets to feel loved during their tests. Why did she have to report me? I spent weeks designing the perfect shade of comfort pink." She wiped her eyes with her frilled sleeve, tripped on the hem of her long gown, and plummeted into the reactor coolant shaft. The next rotation, Wesley led our entire unit to corner me in the maintenance airlock. They forced me into a vac suit without a helmet, cycled the outer door, and watched me decompress into the void. "Who told you to bully our instructor? We love those chits!" Wesley had screamed through the comm as my blood boiled. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the induction hall, and Instructor Maven was pulling out the pink holo chits. This time, I kept my mouth shut. "Look, cadets," her projection orbited the room. "I customized your admission passes with therapeutic pastel wavelengths and retro Earth animal motifs. Isn't it healing?" The hall filled with the obedient coos of 40 teenage candidates. "It's so soothing, Ma'am Maven. The pink frequencies stimulate the prefrontal cortex," a girl named Lyra chirped from the front row, her eyes glazed with the bliss of shared delusion. Most of the boys shrugged, but no one protested. We had all been subjected to Maven's obsession with archaic, infantile aesthetics since she took command of our induction unit 3 years ago. Our training quarters were plastered with cartoon creatures from old Earth called bears and rabbits. Our tactical vests had embroidered patches of smiling suns. We were the laughingstock of every other unit, but Maven assured us we were her special babies. I stared at the shimmering pink chits, and a wave of cold memory tightened my throat. In my last life, these holo chits were a death warrant for our careers. Even though the Proctor General intervened, the delay cost us 20 minutes in the psych evaluation queue. Some candidates panicked, others failed the stress simulation calibration, and the unit average tanked. Wesley and I only made Orion because our raw neural scores compensated. And yet, instead of gratitude, they murdered me for saving them. I pulled myself out of the memory and decided to let them incinerate their own futures this time. But Instructor Maven noticed my silence, which she took for resistance. "Cadet Riven," she called, her voice still syrupy but with an edge of pettiness. "Why aren't you commenting? Don't you find the pink aesthetically superior?" Every head in the hall rotated toward me. Wesley's gaze from across the aisle was particularly sharp and territorial. "It's outstanding, Ma'am Maven," I said, forcing a neutral expression. "Very nurturing." She nodded approvingly, her pigtails bobbing. "I knew Riven had the best visual cortex." "Wait, Instructor?" a cadet named Tobias, the unit logistics officer, said hesitantly from the back. "Aren't the selection passes required to be in standard quantum encrypted data format? Will the portal scanners even parse a decorative projection?" The hall went silent. Instructor Maven's lip quivered, her eyes instantly flooding with synthetic tears. "Are you questioning my aesthetic decisions? I spent 3 sleep cycles researching the exact frequency of comfort pink. Do you really think I'd harm my cadets?" I didn't mean it like that," Tobias stammered. "It's a pass regardless of the color," Wesley snapped, stepping in front of Tobias, his jaw set. "Instructor Maven dedicated herself to our well-being. If you can't express gratitude, then seal your vocoder." "Exactly," Lyra added. "Pink embodies luck and emotional equilibrium. It will calibrate our neural interfaces more effectively." I watched the cult reinforce its walls and tap my fingers silently against my thigh. The deployment chime sounded, signaling the transit window to the testing station.
Instructor Maven wiped her eyes and clapped her hands. All right, cadets, time to board the mag train to the central exam hub. Stay in formation and maintain positive emotional frequencies. Mommy Instructor is so proud of you all.
Everyone grabbed their gear pouches and clustered toward the platform. They were waving their pink hollow chits, capturing selfies for the station's social feed, and projecting the shimmering passes into the air like trophies. It's genuinely beautiful. Our instructor is the most innovative in the academy. The other units have boring, standard data wafers, but ours are unique. I feel emotionally supported just looking at it. I boarded the mag train and sat in the rear compartment, my back to the bulkhead. Pink, I mused silently. I wondered if the proctor droids at the gate would find her comfort frequency as convincing as my unit did. Once the train locked into its mag rail, Instructor Maven drifted down the aisle toward me, her gown swishing against the deck. Riven, let me inspect your pass one more time, okay? Her voice was cotton soft, but her fingers darted out and snatched the hollow chip emitter from my hand. The next sound I heard was the crackle of a data chip being pried loose. Oops, Mommy Instructor had a little spasm. She pressed her fingers to her lips, her eyes wide with theatrical innocence. A corner of the emitter was now dark, the projection flickering erratically. I looked at the damaged chip in my palm and exhaled slowly. Out of 40 candidates, she chose my pass to inspect and, coincidentally, disabled it. The resentment of 2 lifetimes simmered behind my sternum, but I kept my voice steady. Are you deliberately sabotaging me, Instructor Maven? The train compartment went utterly silent. Tears spilled down her cheeks immediately. How can you accuse me of that? You're activating my trauma response. I only wanted to ensure your pass was optimal. Before I could respond, Wesley lanched up from his seat beside me. Riven, that's enough. She stated it was an involuntary muscle spasm. Why are you being so aggressive toward her? You're destabilizing her emotional state in front of the entire unit. When did you become so toxic? Toxic? I laughed, a jagged, bitter sound. Wesley, are you visually impaired or just cognitively compromised? There are 40 candidates here. She inspected no one else's pass, came directly to mine, and disabled it. I didn't allow him to interrupt. For the past 3 years, you all believed this unit ran smoothly, didn't you? The morale decorations, the victory celebrations, the training schedules that made other units envious? Reality check. I executed all of that. During the zero-gravity tactical drill last cycle, when she forgot to book the simulation chamber, I was the one who negotiated with the training sergeant to give us a late slot while she was in her quarters selecting new bear decals. When she misplaced the psycho-evaluation waivers, I was the one who sprinted to the admin spire and forged her biometric signature before the proctors locked us out. Every time you boasted about how cohesive this unit was, I was the one compensating for her incompetence. The atmosphere in the compartment grew dense and uncomfortable. Her tears were still streaming, but her eyes were darting to the emergency exit. She's resented me since she realized I was the actual operational backbone of this unit. If the selection exams weren't so close, she would have petitioned to remove me as unit leader months ago. The silence was crushing. Wesley stood motionless for a moment. Then he actually emitted a low chuckle. Are you finished? He stepped forward, grabbed my damaged emitter, and stared into my eyes. You're so obsessed with past grievances, it's dysfunctional. You're the unit leader. Assisting the instructor is your designated function. Why don't you mention all the time she genuinely cared for us? He pulled his own pink hollow chip from his chest pocket and without any hesitation tore off the data chip. It's just an emitter. Who prioritizes hardware over morale? There, now we're equivalent. Are you satisfied now? The compartment remained silent for approximately 3 seconds. Then, one by one, the other candidates began moving. He's correct. It's not significant. It's just a damaged corner. The projection still renders. The cadet in front of me took her chit and snapped the emitter casing. Then the next candidate and the next. The sound of cracking plastic and flickering projections filled the train like static discharge. I leaned back in my seat, feeling a cold detachment settle over me. This was beyond irrational. Pink projections and broken emitters? I couldn't wait to observe them attempt to pass the portal scanners. Just then, the Proctor General's inspection drone hovered aboard the train for the final compliance check. The drone's optical sensor swept the compartment, and its vocal processor emitted a burst of garbled static. What in the void is wrong with your admission passes? The Proctor General himself was remotely operating the drone, his voice thundering through its speaker.
Why are these projections in non-standard color frequencies? Why are the encryption chips physically detached? Instructor Maven shrank back for half a second, then thrust out her chin. Proctor General, don't be so rigid. I simply wanted my cadets to have a more emotionally supportive testing experience. Emotionally supportive? The Proctor General sounded like he was experiencing a circuit overload. The Astraeus selection protocol mandates standard quantum encrypted data wafers. No holographic modifications, no decorative add-ons. These aren't just the wrong frequency, the anti-counterfeit codes are physically missing. The portal won't even admit them through the outer security perimeter. Instructor Maven burst into loud theatrical sobs, collapsing onto a supply crate. Why are you persecuting me? I sacrificed everything for my cadets. I spent cycles selecting the most comforting shade of therapeutic pink. She suddenly raised her head, her tear-streaked face contorting, and pointed directly at me. She informed you, didn't she? Riven has been spying on me for your office.
Every head in the compartment snapped toward me. I simply leaned back against the bulkhead, expressionless. Wesley predictably sprang to her defense, physically positioning himself between the drone and Maven. Sir, you're over-escalating. Do you comprehend the emotional labor our instructor invested in this? Who cares if the projections are pink? Who cares about some missing chips? We prefer them this way. Affirmative, we prefer them. A chorus of voices rose up. Show us the regulation that prohibits therapeutic color frequencies. We're the top-performing unit in the district. The proctors wouldn't dare exclude us. The shouts of solidarity grew deafening. Candidates were standing, physically pushing toward the drone. The Proctor General's drone hovered motionless for a moment, its processor evaluating the situation. He accessed the chronometer. The first exam simulation began in less than 30 standard minutes. The mag train transit to the testing hub was 22 minutes. There was no remaining time to argue. Fine, remain here. I'm returning to the admin spire to print standard replacement wafers. I will intercept you at the security gate. He hissed, and the drone retreated out the hatch as the door sealed. The compartment exploded in victorious cheers. Affirmative, we prevailed. The old processor unit retreated. Instructor Maven stood up, wiped her face, and flashed a smug expression. Wesley turned around and held up his shattered emitter like a battle trophy. Who requires his boring standard wafers? We're retaining the pink. We stand with Instructor Maven. We stand with her. Pink is superior. The Proctor General lacks aesthetic sophistication. We're the elite unit. They'll authorize an exception for us. He glared at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. I simply felt the reassuring solidity of the standard encrypted data wafer hidden in my inner jacket pocket. Let them vocalize their defiance. The louder they screamed now, the more catastrophic their impact would be. The mag train decelerated at the testing hub. A stern-faced proctor in a crisp gray uniform stepped aboard. Unit 12 Astraeus, I am Head Proctor Alara. Activate your admission passes for inspection before you disembark. Instructor Maven practically skipped toward her, her voice oozing artificial sweetness. Greetings. Behold our passes. Are they not aesthetically magnificent? I printed them in therapeutic pink for my precious cadets. She snatched Wesley's broken emitter and thrust it toward the proctor's scanner. The proctor's eyes narrowed as her device emitted a harsh rejection tone. These are invalid. Astraeus selection regulations mandate standard encrypted wafers. No holographic modifications. No detached encryption chips. It's non-compliant, decorated with unauthorized projections, and the security code is vividly absent. Instructor Maven blinked with practiced innocence. But it was a gift from my nurturing instincts. Wesley added, his voice dripping with condescension. We prefer pink. What are you going to do? Ban us from the most critical examination of our lives over an aesthetic preference? The proctor looked at him with the cold, unblinking stare of someone who had zero tolerance for adolescent theatrics. Affirmative. That is precisely what I am going to do. I will state this once. These passes are non-compliant. If you attempt to enter the security gate or continue to disrupt the screening process, I will summon the station security force immediately. The silence that followed the proctor's declaration was absolute. It was the dense, suffocating stillness that precedes a hull breach. For a moment, the only sound on the train was the low, omnipresent vibration of the mag rail. Then Wesley emitted a scoff that sounded closer to a panicked yelp.
Summon security? Are you malfunctioning? We are the district's designated elite unit. Do you comprehend our average neural aptitude scores? You're an overqualified gatekeeper. You lack the authority to terminate our careers over a hardware discrepancy. The proctor did not flinch. She slowly unclipped her comlink from her belt. Security, this is Gate Aurelius. I have a transport full of aggressive candidates with invalid tampered mission credentials. Request immediate enforcement response. They are obstructing the entrance for other compliant candidates. The crackle of the response came through clearly. Copy, Gate Aurelius, units en route. The delusion shattered. Panic, raw and primal, finally seized the cabin. Wait, invalid? She can't be serious! A girl in the back shrieked, clutching her flickering emitter. Instructor Maven, initiate corrective action! Instructor Maven's eyes bulged. The saccharine mask evaporated, replaced by a trembling, pale expression of genuine terror. No, she stammered, stepping toward the proctor with her hands raised protectively.
You don't comprehend. They are my cadets. I infused the projections with lavender essential oil frequencies so they wouldn't experience anxiety. You must admit them. I am their designated mommy instructor. The proctor looked at her with an expression of profound professional disgust. Ma'am, you have physically destroyed government-issued encrypted data devices. The quantum signatures are missing. The optical scanners cannot validate non-standard projections. By Interstellar Education Directive, they cannot enter the facility. Outside the transport windows, I observed 2 armed station security officers and 3 proctor enforcement droids sprinting toward our train. Other transports from different units were unloading normally, candidates streaming toward the gates with their standard compliant wafers. Time was dissipating. The gates were sealed strictly at 0845 station time. It was currently 0838. Wesley, what do we execute? The unit logistics officer was crying now, her tears streaking her tactical face paint. My progenitor will terminate me if I fail this selection. Wesley declared it was acceptable. Seal your vocoder, I'm processing, Wesley bellowed, his face flushing a deep mottled crimson. He turned back toward the proctor, his bravado collapsing into raw desperation. Look, the proctor general is inbound with replacement wafers. Just permit us to wait inside the courtyard. Negative. Entry without a valid pass is prohibited, the proctor stated coldly. Now, disembark from the transport and vacate the lane, or you will all be detained. I checked my chronometer. The proctor general was a minimum 20-minute transit away, assuming 0 traffic, instantly printed 40 wafers, and teleported back. They were incinerated. And I had no intention of being pulled into the gravity well with them. I slowly stood up, sliding my clear examination kit over my shoulder. Excuse me, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the compressed, panicked atmosphere of the transport, it sliced through the chaos like a monofilament blade. Wesley spun around, his eyes locking onto me. Sit down, Riven. We're maintaining unit cohesion. Nobody moves until they admit all of us. I disregarded him. I walked down the aisle, stepping past a sobbing girl clutching a bear-shaped morale patch, and stopped directly in front of the proctor. Without a word, I reached into the concealed inner pocket of my jacket. I withdrew a pristine, standard encrypted data wafer. No ping projection, no decorative stickers, no damaged emitter casing. The quantum security code pulsed with a steady blue light in the corner. I handed it to the proctor. She took it, scanned it with her handheld validator, and a pleasant harmonic chime echoed through the transport. She returned it with a curt nod. Examination pod 42, simulation chamber B. Proceed directly through the security scanner. Good fortune, candidate. Thank you, I said quietly. I stepped down onto the platform, the cool, recycled atmosphere hitting my face. It tasted like liberation. Behind me, the transport erupted. Riven! Wesley's voice was a guttural roar. I paused on the textured deck plating and turned back to observe them through the open hatch. Wesley was gripping the safety rail, his knuckles bloodless, his eyes distended with betrayal. Where did you acquire that? Why are you in possession of a compliant wafer? I accessed the library terminal yesterday and printed a backup from the central registry, I stated calmly. Because unlike the remainder of you, I do not entrust my future to a woman who believes we are infants. You, a cadet from the back screamed. You possessed prior knowledge. You allowed us to destroy our emitters. You orchestrated this. Negative, I replied, my voice flat. I warned you. I inquired whether she was targeting me when she sabotaged mine. I articulated her incompetence. You selected to mock me. You selected to destroy your own passes to demonstrate solidarity with her. I simply permitted you to exercise your own agency. Instructor Maven lunged forward, her face contorted into a grotesque expression of fury, her frilled sleeves flailing. Riven, how could you perpetrate this? You're abandoning your unit family.
Transfer your wafer to Wesley immediately. He is the top candidate in the unit. He is more deserving. Surrender it to him. I stared at her, absorbing the pure, undiluted insanity of her command. In my previous life, I had been executed for these people. I had been shoved into vacuum, my lungs collapsing in the void, all because I had attempted to salvage them from this precise moment. Have a meaningful existence, Instructor Maven, I said. I turned my back on them and walked toward the security gates. As I passed the enforcement officers, they moved to physically seal the transport doors. The screaming behind me escalated into hysterics. I heard the sound of fists pounding against the interior bulkhead. I heard Wesley bellowing my name, hurling obscenities that echoed off the polished station walls. I heard Instructor Maven wailing like a damaged siren, crying about her precious cadets. I did not look back. I passed through the body scanner, located my pod in Chamber B, and arranged my neural interface tools on the console.
At precisely 0845, the massive alloy doors of the testing hub sealed with a resonant clang. The examinations commenced. For 2 station rotations, the testing hub was a sanctuary of absolute concentration. I channeled every fragment of my knowledge, every sleep-deprived night of study into the simulation scenarios and tactical problem sets. I felt lighter than I had in any timeline. The phantom ache of decompression, the cellular memory of my blood boiling in vacuum faded with every module I completed. When the final simulation powered down on the second rotation, signaling the conclusion of the Astraeus selection exams, I walked out of the facility into the artificial evening light of the habitat ring. I checked my personal comm for the first time in 48 standard hours. It was practically overheating with notifications. The unit group chat contained over 4,000 unread messages. The station's newsfeed had already seized the narrative. Scandal at Gate Orleus. Entire elite unit disqualified from Astraeus selection due to tampered credentials. The details were a symphony of vindication. The Proctor General had arrived at 0902, 17 minutes after the gate sealed. He had argued, threatened, and invoked emergency protocols, but the selection board was immovable. The regulations were absolute. The entire unit of 12 Astraeus had been barred from participating in the examinations. 3 years of relentless training, thousands of credits in private neural coaching, all their aspirations of attending Orion War College or any reputable military institution, vaporized in a cloud of therapeutic pink. I scrolled through the group chat. It was a war zone. The cult of Instructor Maven had collapsed overnight. The candidates who had applauded the pink emitters were now transmitting death threats. Candidate A. My progenitor physically assaulted me for an hour when I returned. My career is terminated. I'm going to neutralize her. Candidate B. She annihilated us. She's a psychotic entity. Why did we ever validate her? Wesley, where is she located? She's not responding to her comm. We need to locate her.
There were no references to lucky comfort frequencies, no defenses of her aesthetic vision. Reality had crushed their delusions, and now they were seeking blood. And Wesley was leading the hunt. 1 standard week later, the selection results were published. I was seated in a quiet cafe module in the Commerce Ring when the portal unlocked. I logged in and accessed the numerical score. 742 out of 750. I was the highest scoring candidate in the sector. The admission manifesto to Orion War College materialized in my inbox 10 standard minutes later, accompanied by a full scholarship allocation. As I consumed my nutrient beverage, my comm buzzed with an incoming transmission. It was a frequency I hadn't seen in cycles. The Proctor General. Candidate Riven? His voice was exhausted, weighed down by an incomprehensible burden. Can you report to the administration spire? The station security force is present. It concerns Instructor Maven. I understood exactly what had occurred. History does not simply repeat itself, it reverberates. I took a transit pod to the Academy spire. The campus, ordinarily humming with the post-exam celebration of candidates clearing their lockers, felt like a mausoleum. Yellow security tape cordoned off the observation deck beneath the central administration tower. I walked past clusters of weeping instructors and emotionally numb candidates. I looked up. There, on the edge of the maintenance balcony, 5 stories above the reactor coolant shaft, stood Instructor Maven.
Her silver hair was a tangled disaster. Her pastel pink gown was stained and torn at the hem. She was clutching a portable amplification unit, sobbing hysterically as a swarm of station news drones and furious progenitors recorded her from the deck. I only wanted them to feel emotionally safe. Her voice crackled over the speaker, shrill and desperate. This system is too austere. I provided them nurturing. I provided them pink. Why is every individual assigning blame to me? But unlike my previous life, I was not the target of her pointed finger. Standing on the balcony with her, restrained by 2 station security negotiators, was Wesley. He resembled a corpse. His eyes were sunken, his uniform was disheveled. His golden boy aura had entirely decayed, leaving only a vicious hollow shell of a young man whose future had been abruptly terminated. "You malfunctioning entity!" Wesley shrieked, his voice echoing across the open shaft. "You destroyed my life! My progenitors are disowning me! I forfeited my Orion placement! Jump! If you genuinely possessed affection for us, compensate for your actions and jump!" The crowd below inhaled collectively. The security officers lunged to physically restrain Wesley, but he fought them, spitting venom at the woman he had violently defended only cycles earlier. "Wesley!" Instructor Maven sobbed, dropping the amplifier. She clutched her chest, her eyes dilated with profound heartbreak. "My precious cadet, my special baby! How can you vocalize such sentiments? I selected the pink for you. You expressed that you found it aesthetically pleasing." "I despised it. Everyone despised it. We only pretended because you're a delusional aberration," Wesley roared, twisting free from an officer's grip and taking a menacing step toward her. Instructor Maven recoiled, the foundational delusion that had sustained a fragile psyche fracturing into a million fragments. The cadets didn't adore her. They loathed her. She stepped backward in shock.
Her heel caught on the heavy lace hem of her frilled gown. For a suspended moment, she teetered at the edge, her arms pinwheeling backward, her eyes locking onto Wesley with an expression of pure, uncomprehending horror. Then she fell. The scream was mercifully brief. The sickening thud that resonated from the reactor shaft a moment later silenced the entire observation deck. I stood at the rear of the crowd, observing the paramedics and hazardous environment teams rush forward. I experienced nothing. No vindication, no pity, just a cold, clinical sense of closure. She had authored her own conclusion again. I rotated on my heel and departed before security began collecting witness testimony. You would assume that would constitute the termination of the matter. The antagonist was deceased. The tragedy was complete. But I understood Wesley. I understood the cowards in my unit. They were fundamentally incapable of accepting accountability for their own decisions. They required a scapegoat. With Instructor Maven vaporized, their grief and rage needed a new target. I knew they were coming for me. 2 rotations later, I received a text transmission from an unregistered frequency. "Riven, it's the unit logistics officer. Please, you must meet me at the abandoned docking ring on the lower maintenance tier. I have Instructor Maven's personal log. It proves she deliberately sabotaged us. You're the sole candidate who qualified for Orion. You must assist us in presenting this to the board so we can petition for a re-examination. Please, I'm terrified."
I stared at the glowing screen in the dim illumination of my quarters. The abandoned docking ring. It was a derelict zero-gravity transfer station where the hull integrity was dangerously compromised, the kind of place where accidents happen frequently. It was also the exact location where, in my previous life, 38 candidates had dragged me, forced a helmetless vac suit onto me, and cycled the airlock while screaming that I had murdered their beloved instructor. A cold smile flickered at the edges of my mouth. "They haven't evolved in the slightest," I responded. "I'll arrive in 20 minutes. Await my presence." I didn't dress for a rescue mission. I dressed for an engagement. I slipped into dark thermal attire, secured my hair tightly, and grabbed a high-intensity industrial floodlight. Before I departed my quarters, I made a transmission to the station security precinct. I had spent the previous 2 rotations heavily insinuating to the lead detective assigned to Instructor Maven's case that Wesley's psychological state was dangerously unstable, and that he had been directing threats toward me for surviving the exam incident. "Detective Oren, it's Riven," I said, injecting precisely the correct amount of controlled panic into my vocal patterns. "Wesley just dispatched an operative to lure me to the abandoned docking ring on the maintenance tier. He's been transmitting threats since the selection results were released. Please, I believe he intends to inflict serious harm." By the time I arrived near the rusted entrance to the docking ring, I could perceive the distant pulse of security sirens approaching from the main transit tube. Perfect synchronization. I proceeded down the dimly lit maintenance corridor, the emergency lighting casting long, skeletal shadows across the bulkheads. As I neared the central transfer chamber, the oppressive silence of the abandoned section felt sickeningly familiar. My cells remembered this location. I stepped into the chamber. "I'm present," I announced, shining my floodlight across the corroded deck plates. From the shadows of the maintenance alcoves, they emerged.
Not just the logistics officer, almost the entire unit. 30-something shadowy figures, their faces contorted with malice, gripping plasma torches, heavy maintenance wrenches, and lengths of severed conduit. Leading the formation was Wesley. He appeared feral, his eyes were bloodshot, his jaw mechanically ticking. "You actually arrived,"
Wesley snarled, stepping into the floodlight beam. "You arrogant void spawn! You always believed you were intellectually superior to us, didn't you?" "I didn't believe it," I replied, maintaining my distance, positioning myself so my back faced the only functional exit corridor, not the compromised hull section. "I proved it. I qualified for Orion. You're going to spend the remainder of your existence servicing waste recyclers." The provocation functioned instantly. The crowd emitted a collective snarl, surging forward. "This is your culpability," a girl shrieked from the rear formation. "If you had simply informed us the emitters were non-compliant, we wouldn't have failed the selection. You withheld critical information to eliminate the competition." "I explicitly warned you on the transport," I stated, my voice perfectly flat. "I inquired whether she was deliberately sabotaging us. I articulated her incompetence. Wesley instructed me to seal my vocoder and destroyed his own emitter to antagonize me. You all mimicked him like programmed drones. How is your deficiency in critical thinking my responsibility?" "You possessed a compliant wafer," Wesley roared, jabbing a trembling finger toward me. "You understood she was psychologically fractured. You permitted her to die. You permitted us to incinerate so you could succeed alone. It's inequitable. We are entitled to those college placements." "You are entitled to precisely what you earned," I said, my voice descending to a vicious whisper. "You coddled a deranged woman because she provided you with decorative morale patches and addressed you as infants so you wouldn't have to mature.
When I performed the actual operational labor to sustain this unit, you designated me toxic. You worshipped the aesthetic of achievement instead of the substance. You excavated your own graves. Terminate your transmission," Wesley bellowed, seizing a plasma torch. "Caesar, we're going to deliver a practical lesson. Let's evaluate her intellectual superiority when she's drifting in the void." The mob surged forward, their faces twisted into expressions of pure homicidal intent. In my previous life, this was the instant I had frozen in disbelief, unable to process how my unitmates could transform into executioners. This time, I did not freeze. I raised the industrial floodlight and aimed it directly at Wesley's face. I activated the emergency strobe function. 12,000 lumens of blinding, disorienting light detonated into the darkness. Wesley shrieked, dropping the plasma torch and clawing at his optic nerves. The front rank of the mob staggered backward, blinded and incapacitated by the violently pulsating illumination. Simultaneously, the corridor behind me erupted with crimson and azure tactical lights. "Station security, drop your weapons, descend to the deck immediately." 4 security transports had navigated the maintenance passages silently, their running lights now flooding the chamber. A dozen armored officers deployed, their stun batons extended, their sidearms raised. The mob's bloodlust evaporated in a millisecond. Adolescents dropped their wrenches and conduits, shrieking in primal terror. Some attempted to flee into the maintenance tunnels, only to be tackled onto the deck plating. The logistics officer collapsed to her knees, sobbing and projecting her hands above her head. I stepped backward calmly, deactivating my floodlight and observing the chaos unfold. Wesley was on the deck, blindly attempting to crawl away, weeping hysterically. Negative! We were merely attempting to intimidate her. We weren't going to execute any permanent harm. It was a social experiment." Detective Orrin advanced past me, seized Wesley by the collar of his jacket, and impacted his face against the deck plating. Attempted assault, conspiracy to commit unlawful restraint, and reckless endangerment in a hazardous environment. Fascinating social experiment. Candidate. The cold alloy restraints clicked around Wesley's wrists. He twisted his head, his tear-streaked, dirt-smeared face searching for me through the strobing security lights. "Riven, please," he begged, his vocal patterns cracking into a pathetic whimper. Inform them we're unitmates, we're designated bond partners. Please, Riven, if I receive a felony conviction, I can never obtain security clearance. My existence is terminated." I walked slowly over to the transport vehicle. I looked down at the young man who had once shoved me into vacuum in another timeline. He appeared so diminished now, so thoroughly, comprehensively shattered. I leaned in close so only he could perceive my voice beneath the sirens. "You prefer pink," I whispered. Wesley's eyes distended with horror as the recognition finally crystallized. There would be no absolution, no salvation. "Remove him from my presence," I instructed the detective. I rotated my back on the screaming adolescents, the pulsating lights, and the phantoms of my previous life. I walked down the maintenance corridor toward the transit tube. The station's recycled atmosphere was cool, and the observation windows revealed a sky dense with stars. Tomorrow, I needed to prepare for my departure. I required dormitory supplies, field manuals, and a new neural interface tablet. I considered purchasing a tablet case.
black, perhaps? Or silver? Definitively, unequivocally, not pink.